I don't want to abolish government. I simply want to reduce it to the size where I can drag it into the bathroom and drown in the bathtub.
You bet I cut the taxes at the top.
How dare you? How dare you? Go ahead, make my day.
The Rick Smith Show starts now.
Welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here. Wow, what a weekend it was. Temper tantrum weekend. Yes, all Sunday was... I just imagined a brooding, stomping... I imagine when my kids were like 3 or 4... maybe even into 5, when you told them they couldn't do something, they'd stomp their feet up the hallway and slam the door, and then they'd come back and they'd stomp back down. I kind of imagine Trump in the bathrobe Sunday, just marching around the White House, really, really angry. Just another, blame it on Hillary. It's all Obama's fault. Oh, there was no collusion. It's a hoax. I'm being persecuted. Oh, the victimhood. I got to be honest. Republicans do victim really well. Every day I see the new victim, Chris Christie, playing the victim. Oh, Bridgegate is just like the Mueller investigation. Oh, I'm such a victim. The people want to hold me accountable for my actions. Oh, the persecution. I mean, at some point, don't you get tired of it? I mean, I listen to this. Look, unfortunately, we're a year and a half into this presidency. But Hillary and but Obama don't work anymore. Tired of it. It's old. You're the president now. Do something other than stomp your feet. And now understand, the president on Sunday demanded, an investigation into whether the FBI was looking into his campaign folks' possible criminal activities. Now, as I've been watching the back and forth, I do think there should be some oversight into if there were FBI agents in his campaign, if there were informants in his campaign, there should be some oversight. It shouldn't be him, though. Sorry. You can't look into yourself. I don't trust that. But there should be if there is, and we need to know why. And I think the why is pretty simple. That everyone knew something was going on with Russia. I mean, I go back to the Republican and the Democratic conventions where the Russia talk was the undercurrent of both events. Everybody knew something was going on. Now, you're talking about the summer before the election. Everybody was kind of whispering, there's something going on. There's, especially at the Democratic convention. And everyone kept telling me as I was asking about it, oh, well, we probably shouldn't go there because, maybe Hillary's got some, some ties there too. Or, we knew that Jill Stein was involved. And I'm going, but it's Russia. And I remember at the time going, hey, it's the Russians. I'm not comfortable with this. And this is where, I look at Trump's tantrums and I look at, the reality of, what did Obama do? I mean, the Wall Street Journal had a piece the other day. What did Obama do during all of this stuff? Trump just tweeted out this morning, yeah, what did Obama do? Well, I think there should be some oversight into that. Why were we looking at Carter Page? Why was Felix Sater on someone's radar? Why would the FBI consider getting an informant within the Trump campaign? Oh, I don't know. Maybe it's because, they've got all of these long-standing ties with Russian oligarchs. Maybe that had something to do with it. And for me, I want to get to the bottom of, how much of our politic is bought by Russian oligarchs. I mean, the money is just, and again, the conversation needs to pivot at some point to, it's the corrosive effects of all of this money that's just destroying our politics. The fact that if you're going to run a presidential campaign, you got to come close to $1 billion. Where does that come from? There's only so many $27 donations that people want to go humping for. You want the Sheldon Adelsons, you want the Koch brothers, you want the big donors. And then how many of them were, hey, we've kind of tapped them out. There's this whole untapped resource of our friends in Russia. And that's where I think, this is what I want to find out from the investigation. Now, according to Rudy Giuliani, which I believe virtually nothing that comes out of his mouth, I don't even know that I believe hello. But he claims that the Mueller people have told him privately that September 1st was the goal. September 1st was the goal to wrap up the whole investigation because he didn't want to follow the same mistakes that Comey made, which was to get involved in the elections right beforehand and to basically sway them. And again, I blame Comey for, I blame Comey a little bit for the Trump presidency. The other part of it is Hillary was a terrible candidate. She did a terrible job campaigning. She should have gone to those states, that everyone said go there and not to Iowa and to other places. But that's a whole nother water bridge, all that gone. I don't know that the September 1st deadline is actually accurate, but we'll see. I mean, I'm hoping. It's been a while. We should get some information, and I then want to see the parade of perp walks. I want to see a bunch of these campaign folks and all the way up the chain start doing the perp walks. Now, again, if you believe Giuliani, Trump's not indictable. And I guess that's part of maybe the ploy to get Trump to sit down for an interview, which again, I would love to see on pay-per-view. I would love to see that interesting kind of somebody asking very pointed questions and Trump's, kind of scatterbrain, kind of, meandering through whatever thought processes bang between those ears. So it's going to be interesting. Now, evidently today Trump is going to officially demand that the Justice Department investigate whether there was indeed an FBI informant in his campaign who evidently had contact with 3 of his advisors during the campaign. Within a couple hours, the Justice Department came out with a statement, said they were going to look into it. And okay. That could take a year to a year and a half. We'll see where that gets us. Just weird, interesting stuff. And again, the Twitter rants and still, I think he's still in the bathrobe, still stomping the feet. We will see where that goes. Let's move on. Evidently, the trade war is off. No trade war going to happen. On Sunday, Steve Mnuchin, the Treasury Secretary, said not going to happen. No trade war. We're going to give the negotiating process some time. The tariffs are off. So, all those steel and aluminum tariffs that were supposed to happen, the $150 billion worth of other Chinese goods that we're going to see tariffs evidently off the table. Let me say that again. Off the table. Completely off the table because they want the talks to proceed. Now, as we talked about on Saturday, the U.S. government and the Chinese government evidently had 2 very intense days of discussions where they agreed to a framework where China is going to buy some agricultural stuff, going to try and open up their markets a little bit to our companies, and very light on detail. Big on picture, light on detail. And again, I'm in this weird kind of world that I don't trust our negotiator. I don't trust Mr. Art of the deal, even a little bit, to be honest, at this point. Because remember, he sold us as he was the Mr. Art of the deal. No one was going to get a better deal than Donnie. And so far, I've yet to see any of it. And if you look at the NAFTA negotiations, which have not been great. In fact, his Twitter rants and all of the attacks on Mexico can't be helpful at the bargaining table. Just throwing that out there. Evidently, according to Mnuchin, may not happen until 2019. Maybe it's not going to happen. And I got to imagine that's a signal to us to go, it's not going to happen. And chances are it's never going to happen. With this administration, I just don't see how that's going to fly. But here's the thing, and this is where you go back to Mr. Art of the deal. I was reading an article on the North Korea deal, and there was a couple of sentences in the article that really summed up how I feel about this administration. Evidently, and everyone's heard this, North Korea has threatened to pull out of the scheduled meeting. Evidently, they really don't want total denuclearization, maybe just kind of something smaller. And they're going to want the U.S. soldiers out of South Korea as well. Evidently, this has angered President Trump. I guess it shocked him as well that really they would go back on their words, even though we've got a couple of generations worth of that. Evidently, he called the South Korean president on Saturday night and asked him why. And again, this is being reported. And I just can't imagine a president actually doing this. But he called a foreign leader reportedly and asked why the statements that North Korea were making privately didn't match up with what they were saying publicly. And it's one of those things where you go, you don't do diplomacy much, do you? You don't get the saving public face and maybe making the deals. And you don't get that really, do you? And it was one of those things where it just highlighted the fact that I don't think he gets it. And maybe naive, I don't know. I find that difficult to believe someone who's done as much real estate and dealing as he's done to be this kind of openly naive of this whole process that, wow, people may not tell you exactly what they're thinking. Who knew? The other part of it is it's also being reported that some of his former aides have said that Trump has been resistant to taking daily briefings about the nuclear program. So here's again my problem right from the beginning when these talks with North Korea were going on and we were going to have a meeting, that we were going to send Trump in there who was going to be completely and totally unprepared. And we're just going to wing it. Just going to completely wing it. We'll figure it out as we go. Because, I'm Mr. Art of the deal. And he's going to go into negotiations with someone who completely understands what he wants. And I would argue still that the Chinese are behind all of this. This is my problem on virtually every one of these things. Like the trade negotiations, I think have to happen. And a lot of this stuff Obama tried during 2016 and tried at other points. And it was the Republicans who, were dead set against it. And all of the think tanks, because I remember the tire case. If you remember, the U.S. filed a case with the WTO to save, U.S. tire production. And, immediately out comes the think tanks and their assessment. This is going to cost us all kinds of jobs, and we're going to it's going to harm consumers and all of this stuff. You go, but what if we don't make any more tires? And these companies wanted to leave. The companies didn't want the trade case. They wanted to leave. They wanted to go make cheaper tires in China and sell them back here at costs like they would have made them here. And the Obama administration, tried to stop that. And I don't remember the Republicans walking along going, yeah, this is what we need to do. So we got interesting times ahead of us. I don't have much faith in our con man. I think North Korea's con man's much smarter. But we will see. Scary, scary times. Love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Going to take a quick break. When we come back, the big farm bill debacle. We're going to talk about that with Rebecca Vallis from the Center for American Progress. Right back after this. Stick around.
10% of the people own 90% of the wealth. Where do you fit in? Take a look at yourself. 10% of the people own 90% of the wealth.
Where smart policy and sound investment matters. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1984. That was the day Toledo auto workers at AP Parts Plant battled police in an attempt to save their union. The battle unfolded on the 50th anniversary of the historic Toledo Auto Light Strike. 400 members of UAW Local 14 had been on strike against the parts plant since May 2nd. The company imposed a final offer that stripped workers of their seniority rights, ended 30 and out pensions, and cut wages by 40%. They then laid off 175 workers and targeted the rest with a campaign of harassment and discipline. Workers walked off the job when the NLRB dismissed the union's unfair labor practice charges. Local newspapers printed the names and addresses of striking workers in a blatant attempt to blacklist them from area employers. Strikers had it with AP's union-busting tactics, which included paying the hated private goon squad, Knuckleus Security, $45,000 a week to escort scabs into the plant. The final straw came with an injunction restricting the number of pickets. In an act of solidarity, area unions came together for a show of union strength. Thousands of UAW people from area auto plants joined with striking OCAW refinery workers at the main gate to challenge the new injunction. Police in full riot gear charged the crowd with tear gas, clubs, and pellet guns, beating and arresting dozens of strikers. A pitched battle ensued between workers and police that lasted up to 18 hours until the company was finally forced to eject scabs from the plant. While workers were jubilant, the strike served as a warning about the future of small parts plants. The strike dragged on for months, ending in deep concessions and outsourcing. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
The man who sends the investor class diving for their tax shelters. Rick Smith.
The rich pay too much taxes, the poor get way too much. Instead of schools, build prisons and lock the children up. We won't believe those lies again, because God is a Republican.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind, you can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. So today kicks off week 2 of the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. And all across the country, there are going to be events and teach-ins and acts of civil disobedience and opportunities to educate, inform, and, well, pull us back to some semblance to some sanity. Maybe, I don't know, back to some values where we care about our neighbors and our friends and our coworkers and all of that stuff. Just good stuff. And look for an event in your neighborhood. So on Friday, the House, the Farm Bill, which was I got to be honest, very happy it went down in flames. The House reconvenes today. Going to be interesting to see where this goes. And here to give us some thoughts on just how bad the Farm Bill was and maybe what we can expect in the coming days, I've asked Rebecca Vallis to come talk with us. She's president of the Poverty to Prosperity Program at the Center for American Progress. Rebecca, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks for having me back, Rick.
So, I got to be honest, I was quite thrilled that it went down, even if it was because the Tea Party caucus didn't think it was bad enough. It still went down.
No, that's right. And I have to say, people who know me know that if Paul Ryan is in a bad mood, generally that means I'm in a good mood. So I'm sharing your glee that this piece of legislation, which would have taken food assistance away from 2 million Americans, possibly more, went down in flames on the House floor last week. But Rick, I have to say, a big part of the story here that's not being told, you mentioned that in part the legislation was defeated because super conservative members of the Republican caucus, the House Freedom Caucus, ended up actually saying that they had problems with the bill. So it wasn't like it was just about moderates defecting. But, I think that a piece of the story here that really is missing from most media coverage of why the Farm Bill was defeated was actually that Democrats voted in lockstep against the bill. We didn't see a single Democrat vote for this piece of legislation. And now that might not seem unusual in this moment of resistance where we're seeing hyper-partisanship in Washington, Republicans all vote, or Democrats all voting, I should say, against a Republican bill. But it's actually wildly unusual in the course of a farm bill, which is a traditionally bipartisan piece of legislation, to not see a single Democrat vote for it. So the reason that we saw this bill go down was not just because of House Freedom Caucus opposition, but also because Republicans didn't have any space at all to lose their members of their caucus in voting for this bill because of unified Democratic opposition, because the provisions in the bill that would effectively dismantle the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, better known as food stamps, as we know it, are so cruel that they couldn't countenance supporting the bill. So to me, that's a big part of the story that's been missing in coverage of this bill, and it's a huge part of why we saw it go down in flames last week.
Now, so on one side of it, as you pointed out, you got all the Democrats who did stick together, and good on them. And I think a lot of that has to do with people calling and emailing and faxing and tweeting and all of that, texting their representatives and saying, "Hey, we're against this." And the other part of it, I think, is you've got a lame duck speaker who is I think he's actually counting down the days until he can get out.
No, that's exactly right. We saw tremendous outcry from people who, after watching Republicans try to take away their health care for the better part of last year and now into this year. In fact, actually, we saw yet another zombie effort to repeal the Affordable Care Act and roll back Medicaid expansion rear its head last week at the same time that House Republicans were trying madly to scramble to find the votes that they needed to pass this farm bill that failed on Friday. But we actually saw people saying, look, I get that you've been trying to take away my health care for the last year and a half. Now you're trying to take away my food. You're also trying to take away my housing. That's part of a separate effort that we've seen Republicans lob in recent weeks. We saw people calling. We saw them showing up at rallies in D.C. and communities across the country. We saw them tweeting. We saw thousands of calls driven in just through some of the platforms that the Center for American Progress Action Fund works with. And we saw organizations and advocates from pretty much every corner of the progressive community standing up and saying, this is not the kind of country that we want to live in, where our policymakers, just months after giving massive tax cuts to the wealthy and corporations, are now turning around and saying, a program that provides $1.40 per person per meal, that's just too much for us to be providing to people who are struggling to put food on the table for their families. That's not the kind of country that I want to live in. And so we saw this massive outcry of people saying, hands off SNAP. And that's a big part of why we saw not just unified opposition by Democrats to this heartless piece of legislation, but also opposition from a number of moderate Republicans who realized that maybe not the best thing as we head into the midterms for their voters to realize that they're not just trying to take away their health care, but they're also trying to take away their food.
Yeah, but on any of this, should anyone at this point, and this is where I keep coming back to, any voter at this point who looks at the Republican Party and doesn't think that they want to destroy housing assistance or health care assistance or food assistance or any of those social safety net programs, I don't know how much more you have to see before you wake up to the reality. Is they've said this from the beginning. They've put people in charge of these institutions who want to destroy them. I mean, what does it take for people to wake up to this?
Well, and I think that we absolutely see people not just awake to this, but rallying in opposition to this in tremendous numbers. And I think that's why we're starting to see Republicans realize how popular these programs are. You know, I think, Rick, it's been conventional wisdom for a long time that Social Security and Medicare are the so-called third rail of American politics. Elected officials and candidates know better than to go near them and to look like they're trying to cut them because they know that the backlash at the polls will be significant. I think what we're starting to see now is Republicans in particular waking up to the fact that it's not just Medicare and Social Security that are tremendously popular and that cutting is hugely unpopular. I think we've seen them now start to realize how popular Medicaid is. They learned the hard way when it was Medicaid that in many ways saved the Affordable Care Act last year and into this year. I think they're starting to realize that the same is true of food stamps, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. And, you know, polling that the Center for American Progress has done actually finds that 2/3 of Americans are opposed to cutting food stamps and nutrition assistance. But it's not even just widespread opposition that we're seeing to cutting these programs. It's also that people are less likely to vote for a candidate who supports these kinds of cuts. That's another finding from that same polling. And so I think we're starting to see Republicans realize that the programs they thought were going to be easy to go after are actually a lot more popular than they realized, and that's going to be something to watch in the weeks and months ahead as we head into the midterms.
You know, I get attacked quite often from people who say, well, you're demonizing Republicans. You know, because I often say, look, you know, they literally want to take food out of the mouths of children. They literally want to kick people off the insurance rolls. They literally want to kick people out of houses. I mean, and you look at the policies that they pursue. Is it possible that maybe they just have a different vision? Because, you know, I keep saying, you know, they talk about Christian values and this being a Christian nation. And I go back to, you know, feeding the hungry and, you know, clothing the naked and caring for the sick and giving shelter to the homeless and all of those things. And yet, policy-wise, they want to undo all of that stuff.
Yeah, it's hard not to agree with what you just said, Rick, when you just look at the basic facts of what's in this farm bill. It would take food assistance away from 2 million Americans, many of whom are children, seniors, people with disabilities, and working people who are working 2 and 3 jobs trying to make ends meet, but finding that their wages just aren't enough, and unpredictable schedules, of course, compounding all of this. You know, Rick, we actually saw a study come out last week that to me shows just how heartless and backwards this farm bill is and the broader Republican agenda to take away health care and food and housing. And that study came out of the United Way. What it found was truly staggering. It was that nearly half of American households don't earn enough to afford basics like food and like housing. Nearly half, 43%. And that's mirrored by polling that we've done at CAP, that others have done as well with similar findings, that people in this country, if you're not a millionaire or a billionaire or a wealthy corporation, this economy isn't working for you. And a big part of that story is something that Republicans are really hoping that people forget, and that is that they have refused to raise the minimum wage, which has become a poverty-level wage. It's been stuck at $7.25 for almost a decade, and that is a big part of why we're seeing so many low-wage workers needing to turn to programs like Medicaid and like food stamps to put food on the table and provide for their families. Republicans are hoping that we forget about that because their agenda isn't just about taking away these basics from families who are struggling to pay for tax cuts for the wealthy and corporations. It's also about marching in lockstep in opposition to raising that poverty level minimum wage. And that's a big part of what we're seeing in their rhetoric about why they're cutting these programs. It's this obsession, this laser hyper-focused obsession on what they call, quote-unquote, work requirements, because they're hoping that by blaming the victim, they can distract people from their refusal to make sure that workers in this country earn enough to be able to provide for their families.
What do you say to the person? The Goldwater Institute came out with a study recently, and I don't know if you know much about them, but they came out and said that anybody who works 40 hours a week isn't in poverty. They claim that because of all the transfer payments, all of the food assistance, all of the housing assistance, all of the earned income tax credits, all of that stuff, that you're actually nowhere near poverty.
Well, there's a lot of sort of magical thinking that goes on the right. You've also got people like Robert Rector over at the Heritage Foundation who denies that poverty even exists in the United States because, oh my God, people have refrigerators. Something
and
that's
cell
become
phones.
a basic. And cell phones, right? Basic appliances that you need to be part of the modern society, right? I mean, oh my God, the thought that people would be able to refrigerate their food so that they don't suffer foodborne illnesses, right? That means that poverty doesn't exist in the United States because people now have refrigerators. That's the kind of denial that we see on the right of the reality that is facing struggling families in this country. But it's almost similar to climate change denial at this point. I think they're realizing that if the facts aren't on their side, they need to invent their own facts. And unfortunately, that's a lot of what we see when it comes to conversations about poverty in this country.
Yeah. Did you see Rex Tillerson's commencement speech at VMI? I mean, I immediately when you said your own facts, I was thinking of his. Really just slap down of the Trump administration, and and the whole idea of there being like universal truths and things that we can agree on. I'm not a Tillerson fan, but I thought the speech was spot on.
No, I think that's right. And, I think we're increasingly seeing people recognizing how dangerous it is to be operating in an environment where you have a president and an administration that is just entirely willing to lie and make up their own facts if the actual facts don't serve their case. And we're watching more and more people get their news from Fox News, from social media, where people sort of operate in these silos and sort of only talk to each other and only get information from certain sources. We've got a segment of this country that actually is believing whatever cover story they're hearing from Trump and from his cronies. It's incredibly dangerous, and it's absolutely operating when it comes to the Republican agenda to take away health care and food and housing and everything else that helps people survive if they're not the millionaires who just got their cuts.
Yeah, it's scary times. Last line of questioning I've got for you. Back to the Farm Bill. So they voted it down. Where does it go from here? I mean, is there a way to make this better, or do they just twist enough arms and threaten enough people to ram through the horrible piece that they had last week? Where are you seeing things going?
So there's talk that Paul Ryan may be trying to cobble together the votes to try again with this piece of legislation, even in the face of unified Democratic opposition. He's continuing to talk to the House Freedom Caucus to see if they can strike some kind of a deal. He's continuing to try to woo moderates. This is what we're hearing is happening. So I think we could see, I'm knocking on wood that this doesn't happen, we could see another effort to try to bring this unfortunate and cruel partisan effort to dismantle the SNAP program back up again. But in the meantime, what we're expecting to see is Senate conversations that actually are bipartisan move forward in service of the introduction of a Senate Farm Bill, which will be sort of the next shoe to drop in this ongoing debate and negotiation. But, I think the thing that to me is particularly striking about sort of this moment that we're in is back to the point I made before. I think we've got increasing numbers of Republicans starting to realize they don't want to be associated associated with this kind of legislation, which is just as toxic as healthcare repeal was. So I think it's going to be interesting to watch where this heads in the weeks and months ahead, particularly as the closer and closer that we get to the midterms. Are we going to see Republicans starting to run away from this bill and tell their voters and their constituents, hey, I actually didn't want to see that, or lying about what it actually would have done in an effort to try to clean up their records in advance of folks going to the ballot box in just a few months.
And it's something we're most certainly going to have to keep an eye on and remember come November. Rebecca, I appreciate the time. Good stuff. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Rick. Appreciate it.
As always, our good friend Rebecca Vallis. You want to check out their stuff, we'll get a link at thericksmithshow.com of how you can check out her work. Great stuff. Quick break. Right back.
Think of all the roads. Think of all their crossings. Taking steps is easy. Standing still is hard. Remember all their faces. Remember all their voices. Everything is different the second time around.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1946. That was the day that Democratic President Harry S. Truman ordered the government seizure of the nation's bituminous coal mines. 800,000 United Mine Workers of America, led by John L. Lewis, had gone out on strike. A wave of strikes washed over the United States after World War II. As part of the war effort, most unions had agreed not to conduct work actions during the war. But as industry profits soared due to wartime government contracts, workers saw little improvements in their wages or working conditions. Pent-up worker frustration boiled over after the war. Historian Jeremy Breacher had noted that the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics called the first half of 1946, quote, the most concentrated period of labor management strife in the country's history. The miners were part of that strife. They wanted improved wages, better health care benefits, and safety on the job. The strike had a ripple effect felt far beyond the coal fields. In early May, the Chicago Tribune warned, quote, the nation's worst coal strike tonight slowed the wheels of American industry toward a predictable full stoppage. Coal turned the wheels of industry, and the strike had drastically slowed mining. The government seized the mines and ordered the miners back to work. But still, the coal companies refused to meet the coal miners' demands. Unsatisfied with the resolution of the strike, the miners walked out again in November. The government fined the union $3.5 million, which it later reduced. President Truman called the work actions a rebellion against the government. But the determination of the miners forced the owners to agree to most of their demands. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com. Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out our website, thericksmithshow.com. So, big primary elections this week in Pennsylvania as, well, turned another House seat from red to blue in the House 178th. Big primary elections this week in Pennsylvania as, well, turned another House seat from red to blue in the House 178th. A good sign there. A historic number of women running for congressional seats. Great stuff there. But on the other side, baby Trump, Scott Wagner won the Republican votes to run against Governor Wolf in November, which scares me on so many levels. And as I say, if you don't know Scott Wagner, he's baby Trump without the charisma or the Twitter account, which is why I've asked Tom Perez, chairman of the DNC, to come talk to us about elections this week and where we need to be going here in the coming weeks and months. Tom, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, Rick, it's always a pleasure to be with you and your listeners.
So what do you think? Flipped another seat from red to blue.
I was excited about that. As you know, that seat has been in Republican hands for about 35 years. We were phone banking on behalf of Helen here at the DNC because our new mission is to help elect Democrats from the school board to the Oval Office. And we've now flipped over 40 seats in state legislatures, Rick. And we're doing it by fielding good candidates, by organizing, and by leading with our values. And when I look back this week at what happened in Pennsylvania, you see dramatic increases in turnout. In 2014, they cleaned our clock. We've got to be honest about that on the turnout front and on the electoral front. This year, we saw about 100,000 more Democrats turn out than Republicans. You know, I grew up in Buffalo, New York, and so I was about 90 minutes from Erie. And in 2016, Donald Trump and others did very well, as you know, in Erie. And you look yesterday, more Democrats turned out there. You mentioned women, and it's remarkable to me that the 18-member delegation to the House in Pennsylvania is all men. Well, we've got 7 women now on the ballot in November in House seats. This is the year of the woman. We started 2018 holding 5 out of the 18 seats. And we have an opportunity, if we continue to organize and continue to stay focused and continue to focus on the core issues of good jobs, the right to form a union, pension security, healthcare security. When we keep talking about those issues, which are the issues that keep people up at night, we have a chance to go from 5 out of 18 to 13 out of 18. We can flip this, but it's going to be a lot of work. We got to make sure we have Tom Wolf reelected at the top of the ticket. Your point early on, Rick, was spot on. Tom is indispensable to our continuing movement forward. So is Bob Casey. But I tell you, I'm confident that we can do this because the energy is everywhere. And one of the lessons we have learned is that we've got to organize in every single community. So we have an every county strategy and every zip code strategy. And that's how we're going to continue this momentum.
No, it's extremely important. And, you know, for the first time in my memory, it appears that almost every House and state Senate seat, there's a competitive race going on. And you know, there was a lot of time where that wasn't the truth.
Well, I'll tell you, Rick, I think everybody learned a lesson from Virginia. Yeah, I still coach my 15-year-old in basketball. There's a term we use in basketball. We call it flooding the zone. And that's what they did in Virginia. They fielded candidates for almost every House of Delegates seat. And not only did they field candidates, they fielded really good candidates, and they made historic gains. So you see in Pennsylvania a tremendous number of candidates, not only in those congressional seats that we discussed, but for these state house seats, state legislature, state senate, you know, places like that. Those down ballot races are so critically important to the long-term success of the Democratic Party. I mean, I know a guy who was a state senator in 2004 and became president of the United States 4 years later. That's why the new DNC is about electing Democrats up and down the ticket, because we've got to build that bench. We've got to understand that you talk about right to work. In order to make sure right to work never, ever happens in Pennsylvania, we've got to elect more Democrats in the state house. And we've got to make sure we reelect Governor Wolf. And that is why we're working everywhere. We're working with our partners. We were proud to work on behalf of Connor Lamb when he won his earlier race. Even though he's running against an incumbent right now, I'm confident that Connor can win because he's an authentic leader and he speaks to the bread and butter issues that people want progress on.
You know, it's interesting you brought up Connor Lamb because I thought he ran a fantastic campaign. In fact, didn't really mention Donald Trump once. But what's interesting to me is the right wing is framing this entire election season as you and other Democrats only have the anti-Trump movement to hold you together as glue. How do you break through that?
By leading with our values. I mean, Connor talked about 3 issues, as you know. He talked about, he talked about healthcare. He talked about pension security, and he talked about the right to form a union and the need to strengthen the union movement. Those are FDR Democratic issues. And you know what? When you continue to talk like that and talk about those issues, that's how we win. And I was so proud to have invested in Connor's race, Rick, because it was such an important issue. And we won in Virginia because Ralph Northam at the top of the ticket was talking about healthcare. Healthcare is the #1 issue in this country. And Democrats believe that healthcare should be a right for all and not a privilege for a few. And the other side believes exactly the opposite. We think that prosperity should be shared, not just prosperity for the oligarchs at the top, but prosperity for everyone. If you work a full-time job, you ought to be able to live a stress-free life. And income inequality is one of the defining issues of our time. We're fighting for better wages. I was proud to be your labor secretary, fighting to make sure that if you went in a coal mine, that air that you breathed wasn't going to kill you. If you were working on a construction site, silica dust wasn't going to get into your lungs. If you worked a full-time job, you were going to get a fair wage. Those were the things I fought for as labor secretary. Those are the things Democrats are fighting for every day, a brighter future for everyone. And that's why we're going to win.
And I got to tell you, I miss you as labor secretary, just to throw that out, because everything that you just laid out there, and it's not pandering, everything you just laid out, this administration is undoing. We're going to be sending kids back into factories, into coal mines, because they're pushing back on the hazardous occupation orders. There was just a story last week of how we're going to put 16-year-olds into factories making dynamite. I mean, it's crazy what they've done, doing away with, safety rules and the Chemical Safety Board and all of this stuff that, people died to get. They're just kind of moving away from.
It breaks my heart, but it also motivates me to no end, Rick. I spent a lot of time down in Greene County, and I spent a lot of time a mile or so below ground with coal miners. That's hard work. And I made a promise to them that I was always going to make sure that we had your back, whether it was your pension security or whether it was your workplace safety. And I'm proud to have worked hard on that. We're proud to have put in place one of the most important worker protection regulations that we've seen at the Labor Department on behalf of coal miners, and then separately with silica dust on behalf of construction workers. You should have a fundamental right when you go to work in the morning to come home safe at night. I met way too many coal miners who were retired who weren't going to see their grandchildren grow up because they already have silicosis. That's unconscionable, and that's preventable. And the reason I'm working so hard to elect people like Connor Lamb and Tom Wolf and Bob Casey and others is because they understand that. They're fighting for everyday Pennsylvanians. You look at Barletta and Wagner. They're just fighting so that we can take away health care. They are far, far to the right of what Pennsylvanians believe. And that is why we've got to work hard and we've got to organize everywhere. We took too many voters for granted, Rick. We're never doing that again. The new DNC organizes everywhere. We are fighting hard for the right to form a union and the right to maintain a union. And we have to understand that the other side has it out for us because they believe if you're not at the table, you're on the menu.
Yep.
And they want us to be on the menu. That ain't going to happen. We're fighting like heck and we're winning. And Pennsylvania can be ground zero in our efforts to take back democracy. Think about this. We need 24 seats to take over the United States House of Representatives. And we can get 7 of them from Pennsylvania if we work hard and continue to lead with our values. That's amazing. At the end of the year, Pennsylvania can be a ground zero in our successful efforts to regain and retake our democracy.
No, I'm right there with you. Last line of questioning I've got for you, because, one of the things that I keep saying on our radio program is that the Republicans are trying to undo the New Deal, really undo the 20th century and move us back to the good old days of the 80s and 90s and not the 1980s and 90s. Bernie Sanders just came out with the Workplace Democracy Act. Is this something that you guys are going to move front and center? Because I've been saying for years what we need to do is we need to repeal Taft-Hartley and move back to the original intent of the NLRA and give workers the right to sign up and join up and negotiate and get that first contract. Is this going to be a central tenet, do you think?
Workers have to be a centerpiece of everything we do as Democrats, and things like card check that I was strongly supportive of. We've got to make sure that we are working together with workers. We need a 21st century National Labor Relations Act that enables workers, that has as its North Star the right to organize, that understands and takes a page from what other countries do. I've spent a lot of time in Germany where works councils gave workers a seat at the table, not just on wages and benefits, but on governance issues. And when we think about ways that really empower workers and give them a voice at the table, that's not simply good for workers. It's good for business, and it's good for the middle class. When you look at the history of the 20th century, income inequality was at its lowest, Rick, when labor union density was at its highest. And the Republicans know that because they've studied it, and they want to reverse that. They think that the Gilded Age was a golden age. I don't think it was. I think it was a terrible time for people going to work in factories that were chronically That is why in the 21st century, the Democratic Party is at the forefront of making sure we build a new social compact so that you don't have to make a choice between your family and your job because you have a right to paid leave. You know, we're the only industrialized nation on the planet that doesn't have some form of paid leave. We've got to improve that. We've got to raise our minimum wage. We've got to make sure that if you can't afford to get higher education, whether it's an apprenticeship or whether it's community college, that you can get access to that. You shouldn't have to win the lottery to get more education. And those are the tenets of the Democratic Party. Those are the things I fought for my entire life. And those are the things we're going to fight for when we take back the House and take back the Senate.
Good stuff, Tom. You know, return to that phrase that I grew up with. If you work hard, you played by the rules, you got ahead. Good stuff, Tom. I appreciate the time.
Always a pleasure, Rick. Thank you. And all your listeners, let's keep the fight up. We've got, can't take any weekends off here between now and November.
Good stuff. Tom Perez, chairman of the Democratic National Committee. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Excited about November? I know I am. Quick break. Right back. Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out our website, thericksmithshow.com. So, big primary...
Israeli live fire killed at least 60 people in clashes along the Israeli-Gaza border.
Although some of the demonstrators threw Molotov cocktails, used slingshots to throw stones, flew burning kites into Israel, and attempted to use wire cutters against the two fences between Gaza and Israel. These actions alone do not appear to constitute the imminent threat to life or deadly injury which could justify the use of lethal force.
He went on to describe the residents of Gaza as being penned in behind fences and suffering from ever greater poverty as Israel's decade-long blockade of Gaza drags on.
They are, in essence, caged in a toxic slum from birth to death, deprived of dignity, dehumanized by the Israeli authorities to such a point it appears officials do not even consider that these men and women have a right, as well as every reason, to protest.
Gaza residents did receive slight relief on Friday as Egypt announced it would open its Rafah border crossing with Gaza for the month of Ramadan, which ends on June 14th. According to Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, opening the border crossing is an attempt to alleviate the burdens of the brothers in the Gaza Strip. Meanwhile, Kuwait, a current member of the UN Security Council, has proposed that an international protection mission be sent to Gaza to shield civilians, though it's unclear what form that protection force would take or how the resolution could survive a veto from the United States. Luke Vargas, The United Nations.
Waving the flag of freedom for people, not corporations. Rick Smith.
So the right wing all in a tizzy today. This happened last spring as well. Evidently, we're coming to the end of the Supreme Court's session, this session. And the talk is that 81-year-old Anthony Kennedy could be stepping down, retiring, moving on to other pastures. And look, this is, again, another reason why November is so important. A Senate with some sanity. This is why I keep going. The Democrats need to grab a hold of the Senate to stop the next Neil Gorsuch, to stop the next Samuel Alito or the next Clarence Thomas. Stop that. Kennedy is viewed as someone who's, a little more moderate than the extremes. And there's, a very real fear that Trump put someone in who's, completely off the beaten path. And then you end up losing the court for a generation. And we head down this path towards corporate rule, toward, extreme limited government, to where, the people who say, it's small government. What the small government people really want is ineffective government. so small that it can do nothing to make people's lives better. So when there's the next bust, it's what Pat Toomey wanted in a hard down, which means millions more people lose their jobs, millions more people lose their savings, millions more people end up in poverty, and when it comes back, the wealthy then become even wealthier. This is the world that we're going back to, and we've been here before. Hello, 1880s, 1890s. But it's interesting to me to see the reporting coming out of this, because there's some people. The Above the Law blog is reporting that Kennedy just hired 4 clerks for the next term, so he wouldn't have hired 4 law clerks if he wasn't going to stay another year. And I'm hoping that happens because maybe the Democrats can hold out for someone a little saner. Just kind of a thought on that, because understand, the right wing is just frothing in the panties over what they can accomplish. The end of the 20th century, if you will. And I look at the Freedom Foundation's latest musings to their base, titled "The Opportunity of a Lifetime," where they're talking about how they're going to be able to go back and claw back all the gains that organized labor has fought for over the last 100 years. In fact, one of the lines that caught me and caught my attention was in their piece. They go, "To honor and to the horror and dismay of government unions across the country, the Supreme Court is taking up Janus versus AFSCME this term. As a result, we may well be on the verge of an historic victory over government unions. And now is the time to put ourselves in a position to make the most of this incredible opportunity." And then they go into, how, it's going to be their great pleasure to go and disorganize the organized. It's going to be their great pleasure to go out and spend tons of money doing deceptive campaigns to get members away from their unions. And this is coming. Their sole goal is not about, they don't care about the working people. They don't care about that. They care about power. And I've said this before, unions give workers power. It's that simple. I have a lobbyist. When I was a member of a labor union, I had a lobbyist in Congress and in the State House who were pushing for pieces of legislation to make workplaces safer, to make pension security possible, to make health care more stable, to do sane, rational things for working people. What they want is to destroy that power. And they're heavily funded. One of the campaigns I saw to do this unorganizing campaign was upwards of $90 million. And, the reality is they know what prize is on the other side. And for the billionaire class to reach into their pockets and go, yeah, this is what we want to do. We want to destroy those unions so those workers can say nothing. And I go back to that clip of Diane Hendricks with Scott Walker. And if you haven't seen it, look it up. Where she's just, all in a tizzy. She's like, "Oh, when do we get right to work?" And you go, why is that important to a billionaire? Why is that important to someone who can have anything they want? Why is that important? Because the truth is they can't have anything they want. They can't have it all. They still have to sit down and negotiate with those unions until they destroy them. And then it's back to robber baron, corporate titan rule, which is you better know how to jump or you're going to be fired. And sadly, too many workers in this country have the at-will employment mindset that they don't, and I don't know how you get past not understanding that you should have some rights. And I always point to the Pennsylvania workers' compensation law that still refers to the employer-employee relationship as master and servant. Just one of those things that, again, you have to remember. Now, this is not going to go away. The Freedom Foundation, which you got to love the name, Freedom Foundation. They're not going anywhere anytime soon. which is why, again, hopefully people will pay attention, will wake up, and maybe we're able to push back a little bit. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I'm going to take a quick break. When we come back, Will Bunch is going to be here, national columnist over at the Philadelphia Daily News, going to talk about the money. How deep do Trump's pockets go, and where did he get it from the Middle East? Right back after this.
Controversial, thought-provoking, opinionated. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1949. That was a very important day for workers on the islands of Hawaii. It marked the passage of the Federal Hawaii Employment Relations Act, more popularly known as the Little Wagner Act. The Wagner Act had granted the right to unionize to most non-agricultural workers in the United States. The Little follow-up to the act extended the right to join a union to Hawaiian agricultural workers. The International Longshoremen and Warehousemen Union were instrumental in pushing for this legislation. Robert Kumanera, who had worked on the island of Koloa, reflected on the significance of the right to join a union, saying, "It was not a matter of wages and conditions, but pride. Because when you say you work for the plantation, you were pitied, that it was synonymous with $1 a day, and that you were living in one old plantation shack. So, union, to me, union is pride." 1 year after winning the right to organize, sugar plantation workers participated in a massive strike. Some 26,000 workers embarked upon a 79-day strike against the plantation bosses, effectively shutting down 33 of 34 plantations on the island. The strike was seen as a turning point for labor relations in Hawaii. Workers across ethnic lines joined together in solidarity against the paternalistic plantation system. During the strike, the workers received broad community support. As Kumanero stated, it was a matter of pride for the workers. In 1943, before the Little Wagner Act, there were 13 labor contracts in Hawaii. By 1947, that number had multiplied to 166 labor contracts. Union representation was now a reality for Hawaiian workers, and there was nothing little about that. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Your working class radio experience, where hard work, common sense, and rational thought are a reality. The Rick Smith Show.
Working hard to make a left. Reach out a bomb red. Father, son, left to carry on. Blue denim had his vein. He's a working class man.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So the temper tantrum continues. If you follow the Trump Twitter tantrums, which I do, and it's one of those things where, you wake up and you go, I just don't want to go through this again. Can we start the day off with something other than, bits of insanity and victimhood? Just, one day maybe. I mean, that ruined my Sunday. Absolutely ruined my Sunday and I guess I did it to myself. I think we all do. Anyway, the questions become, as the investigations continue, as, well, the kleptocracy moves along, you got to wonder. You look at the China deal now. Where'd the about face come from? Is it the $500 million deal in Indonesia? You look at the about face in a lot of our policy. You got to wonder, is it the money? That's why I've asked Will Bunch to come talk with us. He's written an article on how the Trump family sold U.S. foreign policy to the highest bidder. Will, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, Rick, thanks for having me back. I appreciate it.
Anytime. I look at this and, I keep asking the question, what's for sale in our government now? How much is a policy worth? How much is Trump going to walk away with at the end of this presidency?
Yeah, the stories that have broken just in the last week have been stunning. It's funny because, I write, I have this kind of offbeat schedule, and I write a column on Sunday mornings, which I know is a weird time to work, but and it goes online Sunday, which is kind of cool because so much stuff happens on the weekends now. But anyway, I was planning to write my column about two things that I did mention in there, which is and you mentioned one, the Chinese deal where this fund this Chinese-backed fund is pouring $500 million into this project that is also closely associated with the Trump organization. And the fact that this happened at the same time that Trump's making all these policy decisions that seem to be beneficial to China. First was the ZTE, the telephone corporation that might be spying on us and was sanctioned, and now Trump wants to unsanction. And I actually wrote the piece before news came out last night about, maybe dropping this trade war with China, which is, possibly might be a good idea, but not if he's doing it because he's getting the money. And then the other thing was that this deal to bail out the Kushner family's disastrous investment in this New York skyscraper, 666 Fifth Avenue, which again is being funded by the Kuwaitis after the Kuwaitis seem to have bent their will to U.S. policy demands and to Saudi Arabia, which is their allies. So those two things were stunning to me in the first place. And then Saturday, the New York Times hits with this blockbuster. I mean, I think this is really the biggest story on the Trump corruption front that's broken since the story about the first Trump Tower meeting broke last summer, which is, that this emissary from the princes who run Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, UAE, was in Trump Tower basically saying that these countries wanted to help Trump get elected, that they were willing to put their wealth behind it, that they were willing to hire this psychological warfare company run by an ex-Israeli spy to run a social media campaign that sounds very similar to what Cambridge Analytica and some of these other companies was doing. And we don't know exactly 100% what the outcome of that meeting was, but we know that the United States has been running foreign policy interference for Saudi Arabia and its ruler that everybody calls MBS, and I'm not even going to try, is Mohammed bin Salman. I hope I got that right. So, I mean, when you look at the big picture, I mean, you have the Trump campaign meeting with Russia, meeting with representatives from Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, and now that Trump is president, he's basically designed a foreign policy around these countries and what they want, whether it's dropping the Russian sanctions or supporting Saudi Arabia's immoral civilian killing war in Yemen. I mean, it's really pretty atrocious. And as I note, I mean, this is at least 10 times bigger than Watergate if as these dots start coming into focus.
No, and look, I go back to Inauguration Day, and I said, and I hate being right, but I predicted, and I think as a lot of people did, I think a lot of people predicted this administration was going to be a kleptocracy. I mean, we were going to see the largest heist in the history of civilization, in my view. Everything would be for sale. Everything would be up to the highest bidder. And they've just proven what a lot of us, back then were predicting. They're just proving us right.
Yeah, absolutely right. And I mean, I think the stage was really set for all of this. Remember that the press conference that they had right before Trump became president, where they piled, dozens of folders on this big desk and said, these are all the agreements that Trump is signing that will, keep him out of his business, and there won't be conflicts of interest. And the whole thing was just like so many things that Trump does, just a completely orchestrated sham. I mean, it was basically the Trump University of news conferences, right? I mean, it was a totally made up thing. And I mean, the truth is, he's still running his business. I mean, not running its day-to-day operations, obviously, but he's still profiting from his business. And he's still in contact with his sons who are running the business. And ditto for Jared Kushner. Jared Kushner is still an owner of his family business, and he's still deeply involved, we have to assume, with his family's business activities. I mean, he may not be the one negotiating with these funds on 666 Fifth Avenue. His dad probably is, but he knows what's going on, and he's been placed, with no experience whatsoever. He's been placed in charge of Middle Eastern policy for the United States. Donald Trump is out there telling us that Jared Kushner is the only person who knows how to solve, bring peace to the Middle East, which is absurd. And the truth is, Jared Kushner seems to be the only person who knows what's good for his family's business interests and what's good for the Trump family's business interests. So, yeah, I mean, it's just really appalling. I mean, it seemed bad in the early days, what he said after the inauguration. I mean, it looked bad when we say, the Kuwaitis and these other countries are booking their parties at Trump's hotel in D.C. But, you know, it's starting to emerge, I think, the corruption is on a much more massive scale. And you've got these wheeler dealers like this George Nader, who's the guy who represented the Saudis and the UAE at this meeting, who were tossing around tens of millions of dollars, you know, to insiders. And, you know, I mean, one of the possibilities that's been raised by all of this is, you know, are these slush funds that are being funded by people like Russian oligarchs and people like the UAE and Korean defense contractors? I mean, are these slush funds paying off Donald Trump's mistresses? You know,
that could be a good question as well. But back to Kushner. Back to Kushner. You said that, you know, he's the only one who has the experience. He doesn't have any experience, but he also doesn't have any security clearance either. Which is, again, you look at everything this administration does, it's so backwards. And this realignment of our foreign policy, I mean, you know, people are grasping for an idea of, you know, how is it we're moving in this direction? And I got to think you're right. It's the money.
Follow the money, like Woodward and Bernstein said, right? You know, and there's just so many tentacles of this. You know, I mean, just one thing, and I was thinking more about this today is, you know, our alliance with the Saudis and this prince Mohammed bin Salman, MBS, who portrays himself as a reformer, and he's not a reformer. I mean, he came in there, he imprisoned all of his rivals in this luxury hotel and tortured some of them. A story broke this weekend that he's even arresting people who dare, you know, protest for women's rights in Saudi Arabia after he spins himself as a liberal guy. But you mentioned Kushner. It's interesting. I mean, Kushner has particularly fostered a close personal relationship with this Saudi prince, and you mentioned security clearance, and I mean, there was some fascinating informed speculation, I would call it, about whether Kushner was using all the information that he was picking up that he shouldn't have been picking up without a security clearance, you know, without a permanent security clearance, and whether he was funneling this information to the Saudis and that they were using it to figure out who the prince's enemies were and who they should imprison and who they should torture, you know, and that's just, you know, that's just beyond morally unconscionable if that's indeed what happened. But you know, and some of these things, you know, some of these inferences that we can draw from these corrupt activities, you know, maybe some of them didn't go through in the end. I mean, for example, we don't have proof yet that the Saudis actually funded this Dirty Tricks campaign, or the UAE funded it. But just the appearance that's set forth by having these meetings, you know, that the appearance of corruption is corruption. Yep. And I mean, the appearances of these meetings, the appearances of the things that Jared Kushner is involved in when, you know, he still has all these business interests, is just appalling. I mean, you know, and I didn't really get into this in my piece as much as I'd like to, but you know, the second half of this is something needs to be done beyond Trump. I mean, there needs to be, you know, if the system is this weak that it can be abused this much, then we have to strengthen the system so that it's clear, you know, it needs to be more clear what constitutes a conflict of interest for a president of the United States and what constitutes a conflict of interest for a president's advisors, and
right.
and you know, after what we've seen with Jared and Ivanka in the White House, it's a shame because nepotism's given us a few great leaders like Bobby Kennedy, right? But I mean, by and large, you know, when we see how it can be abused, maybe it's time to crack down on nepotism in the executive branch.
Yeah, but don't you think you know, we used to, as citizens, as voters, we used to care about this? I mean, what I find just amazing to me is there's a pretty large segment of the population who, you know, maybe Trump was right. Maybe he could go out on Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody in Times Square and nobody would care. Maybe that's true. I mean, because you bring up a lot of this stuff that you've talked about with some of these Trump supporters, and there's not even a bit of concern whatsoever.
Right.
And that's the thing that scares me, that we're now normalizing what used to be appalling. We're now normalizing, going, not a big deal.
Yeah, I mean, in my business, journalism, you know, there's a famous saying which I'm sure you're familiar with, right? That sunlight is the best disinfectant, you know, and you know, that's one of those, you know, license plate type mottos that people carry around. But really, is that true anymore? I mean, how much more sunlight can we throw on the activities of Trump and Jared Kushner and the people working for him? And you're right. I mean, we now have a baseline which appallingly could be as high as 40% of the public because, Trump's approval rating keeps holding at about 40%.
Yep.
Despite disclosure after disclosure. And basically, it's funny, in the context of this Saudi Arabia UAE story that broke over the weekend, the Trump team apparently loves to hire these experts in PSYOP, psychological warfare, right? That's supposed to be what Cambridge Analytica's specialty is or was or whatever their status is these days. And that's what this Israeli spy was offering was this guy's company called the Psy Group. Its motto is, quote, shape reality, unquote. And when you think about it, I mean, you have a situation now where 40% of the American people have had a reality shaped for them that is unreal, for want of a better term, because everything is upside down for them. That this, you have the most corrupt president in U.S. history. And when you try and investigate it, it's not the president that's corrupt; it's the investigators that are corrupt. That a president can go out during during the height of his campaign and be talking to Russia and be talking to Saudi Arabia about making deals to help him to get him elected. Which, if it's not clear to anybody listening to this, I mean, getting foreign help to get you elected president is about as illegal as it gets, right?
But here's the thing. Over the weekend, the temper tantrum over the FBI maybe having an informant in his campaign, if all of what you're saying is accurate and what the New York Times is saying is accurate and all of the things that we see coming out about the Russia meetings and all, if that's true, I wanted the FBI to have someone have an informant in that campaign. I wanted somebody with a conscience to say, hey, there's some illegal stuff going on here.
Yeah, I mean, to shift gears, I mean, from what I've read about this informant, who, for better or worse, his identity and his actual name is pretty widely out there at this point. Is somebody who has ties going back decades to the U.S. intelligence community, and he's kind of a Reagan era, figure. Not somebody I would normally be a huge fan of. But look, when somebody like that with that kind of background sees what these Trump people were up to, it would be immoral for him not to go to the people he knows in the intelligence community and report this. That's what an informant is. An informant is somebody who's out there dealing with people, some of whom may or may not be unsavory types, and he hears stuff and he's then bringing the information he hears to law enforcement, which, despite everything we've been through, we kind of like to believe are the good guys, and at least in this scenario, right? The people who hopefully have the power to subpoena people and ask questions and intervene and make sure that a runaway corrupt government doesn't run away from us, right? And and so to make this into some kind of, James Bond spy operation that was hatched to entrap the perfectly honest, legitimate Donald Trump campaign is just absurd, and it just, it turns everything on its head. But again, I keep coming back to this. It's shaping reality. It's psychological warfare. I mean, they have a network with the existence of the Fox News channel. Yep. And aided by
talk radio.
Talk radio, present company excluded, of course. They're able to shape reality. They're able to create a world, where everything is, and I see it every day. I get dozens of emails from these people, and why weren't you writing about Obama's corruption? Well, maybe because Obama was not a perfect president, but in terms of corruption, he clearly, by any measure, had the least corrupt administration, since probably Eisenhower, and even Eisenhower had a few problems. So, but this is the mindset of these people, and Hillary Clinton has some things that were certainly litigated in the primaries when she was running against Bernie Sanders, and I personally believe some of those things should have been discussed and litigated during the primaries. But these people, are convinced that Bill and Hillary Clinton are the greatest criminals in American history, and that as a result, any discussion of Donald Trump's what he did or didn't do is off the table until we get Hillary Clinton, the criminal mastermind, behind bars. I mean, it's just a worldview that's insane. But yet, it's taken root with 40% of the people. And in business, there's something called a leveraged buyout, where a very small percentage of the shares, like 10, 15% of a company's shares, can take over the whole company. I mean, we've had a leveraged buyout in the United States, where it took 35, 40% of the people basically to take control of the whole country. And and there's no guarantee. There's no guarantee that we take it back in 2020. All the people who look at all the things that Trump has done and say he can't get reelected. We were all the same people who said he couldn't get elected in 2016. So
I've never said that, by the way. I've never said he can't get reelected.
No, well, I during the first year of his presidency, I entertained that thought from time to time, but then I took a deep breath and said, well, no. I mean, I didn't think, I was out there on November 8th, 2016, talking to people, paying their tributes to Susan B. Anthony and the other suffragettes, and had this great story written up about the first woman president, because that's what I thought was going to happen. And, I know better this time around. So I mean, to me, the big question is, this sweeping pattern of corruption, which in my column I outlined basically, has three components, stealing the election, basically using dirty tricks, a la Richard Nixon, but updated for the computer age. Personally enriching the Trumps, the Kushners, Michael Cohen, other key players. And then the third element is bending U.S. foreign policy to whatever it is to keep the cash spigots open. I think the outlines of this conspiracy are pretty clear now. So the question is, what are we going to do about it? What is Congress going to do about it? What
obviously nothing.
Yeah. Well, this Congress, apparently nothing. I mean, I don't know, Rick. I mean, what do you think it would take at this point for, more than a handful of one or two quack Republicans, for a serious number of, quote, moderate, unquote, Republicans to say this guy's got to go? I can't even imagine at this point.
No, not with this Congress. And that's why, again, I keep coming back to November, why it's so important. And earlier we had Tom Perez on the program talking about, hey, Democrats, you got to get out and vote. They're running candidates. You got to get out there and get some fresh blood, some different ideas, some different thoughts, and people who believe in the transparency of sunshine and the sanitizing effect of it. And we begin from there. I'm hopeful, but like you, I'm not certain. Which again is why it's so important that pieces like yours get read, and I hope folks will go take a look at how the Trump family sold U.S. foreign policy to the highest bidder by Will Bunch. Will, always great talking with you. Appreciate the time, man.
Yeah, Rick, I appreciate you having me on again. Anytime.
Good stuff. Will Bunch, again, check it out. We'll get a link, and we'll put it out over at our Twitter account. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Yes, it is all about the children, even after they're born. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1984. That was the day Toledo auto workers at AP Parts Plant battled police in an attempt to save their union. The battle unfolded on the 50th anniversary of the historic Toledo Auto Light Strike. 400 members of UAW Local 14 had been on strike against the parts plant since May 2nd. The company imposed a final offer that stripped workers of their seniority rights, ended 30 and out pensions, and cut wages by 40%. They then laid off 175 workers and targeted the rest with a campaign of harassment and discipline. Workers walked off the job when the NLRB dismissed the union's unfair labor practice charges. Local newspapers printed the names and addresses of striking workers in a blatant attempt to blacklist them from area employers. Strikers had had it with AP's union-busting tactics, which included paying the hated private goon squad Knuckleus Security $45,000 a week to escort scabs into the plant. The final straw came with an injunction restricting the number of pickets. In an act of solidarity, area unions came together for a show of union strength. Thousands of UAW people from area auto plants joined with striking OCAW refinery workers at the main gate to challenge the new injunction. Police in full riot gear charged the crowd with tear gas, clubs, and pellet guns, beating and arresting dozens of strikers. A pitched battle ensued between workers and police that lasted up to 18 hours until the company was finally forced to eject scabs from the plant. While workers were jubilant, the strike served as a warning about the future of small parts plants. The strike dragged on for months, ending in deep concessions and outsourcing. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com. Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. You know, Will hit on something there that I just, I go back to when I started this program almost 13 years ago. Exactly what he said about the psych ops, about the psychological warfare, and how they've created an alternative reality. And, I've been saying this for really a long time, that the left never figured out how to provide a balance to what the right wing had done with talk radio. They never figured out how to build the infrastructure so that they could compete for those talk radio listeners. There was never any leveler. And you go back to the fairness doctrine, during the Reagan, up until the Reagan years, when Reagan did away with the fairness doctrine, and you ended up seeing the rise of Limbaugh and others. The right wing saw this as an opportunity. In fact, Reagan was put into position to push, among a whole bunch of other things, to push the end of the fairness doctrine so that the right could take over that media space. This was not a conspiracy. You sound like a tinfoil hat guy. No, this was very methodical. It was well planned out. It was well executed, and they did exactly what they had said they were going to do back in 1971. They were working towards building this machine, this echo chamber, this empire of messaging, where you create your own messages with your think tanks. You have your own policy networks where you create your own facts, you regurgitate them amongst your organizations, and then you have a microphone arm or a megaphone arm with both on radio and on TV and now on the internet and in all these places where they do an amazing job. They really do. They do an amazing job of self-promotion amongst their cliques. The left never figured that out, and I don't know that they ever will. People go to me all the time. Why don't I hear what you're saying on other places? Well, one, it's not commercial. You're not going to get, Walmart to advertise on this program. Just not going to happen, and nor would I take it. You're just not going to get them because you're going to go, what? I'm going to pay for someone to say my workers should be organized? That we should be paying them higher wages with better benefits and better health care and better retirement security and vacations and sick days, and really they would never do that ever. And you got to give the right credit. They were smart and built something. I argue that labor missed many opportunities to do just that, to buy a television network back in the 70s like the 700 Club did, to invest in infrastructure or even programs like this to stay on track. And this year has been just a horrible year for programs like mine and others. A bunch of them have gone out of business. A bunch of them have closed up because the revenue's not there, because the left doesn't invest in it. And it's one of those moments where if you're not going to compete in this space, you're going to get completely dominated. which is where Will Bunch is from. In Philadelphia, there are 4, I think possibly 5 conservative talk stations. There are no left or liberal or sane or anything on the other side. There's no balance. So in that talk era, in that talk space, all you get is crazy and crazier. And that's a serious problem of where we are as a country and where we're going forward. And the idea that 40% of the population is in the Trump camp still, with all of the kleptocracy and all of the scandal and all of the the porn star and all of this stuff that would have brought down any other administration. It doesn't matter for these people. This is the first talk radio president. This is the first shock jock president. This is the first person where nothing will surprise these people, because they've been trained to go, the end is we want the Supreme Court so we can undo every bit of socialist, liberal, anything. Do away with it all. We can go back to the good old days of pay or die. Go back to the good old days where the 1% ruled with an iron fist. And yet, oddly enough, the people who vote for these folks don't seem to quite understand that they're not the 1%. That's the part that just blows my mind. And that they're expendable and that they're disposable. I talk to workers all the time, and I just had one of these weird back and forths with a guy who works for the post office, of all places, telling me that unions are horrible and they only protect lazy people and all this stuff. I'm going, but they get you the best health care you're ever going to find anywhere. You have a good retirement package. You get good wages. You have decent working conditions. That didn't just happen. It's really, really quite incredible to me. But look, until the Democrats or liberals or the left or however you want to characterize it, until they come around to wanting to compete in spaces, they're going to continue to get their hats handed to them. Because look, people want to know things. People want to believe that they understand something, and the right has given them a narrative. I can't tell you how many times I get platitudes and talking points from people who don't understand the next step. And this is where Democrats have an opportunity to educate and to inform and to, stop getting their hats handed to them. Anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I'm going to take a quick break. When we come back, Bob Nate, Talk Media News. Stick around.
I'm working all the time. It seems to me I could live my life a lot better than I think I am. I guess that's why they call me the working man.
Making the blue blood see red. The Rick Smith Show.
As I look back on those decisions, I would not make the same decisions again.
EPA Chief Scott Pruitt, who still has a job, gets grilled by Democratic senators.
In some cities, every single road shut down.
Extreme storms kill 5 in the northeastern U.S. King County, Washington files climate liability lawsuit against major oil companies. Plus,
if they're exercising during the 3rd trimester of pregnancy, they may want to consider not exercising outside.
New study finds air pollution dangers extend into the womb.
All of those dangers and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
I love cold country. My lungs are so black I once had the hiccups and a canary flew out.
This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, in our last Green News Report, you had a story on how global warming is making storms worse. And what do you know? Today we have terrible storms on the East Coast.
Yes, a large and very dangerous storm system caused severe damage in the Northeast this week, including generating 3 tornadoes in New York State, where Governor Andrew Cuomo declared a state of emergency. The storm's record-setting high winds caused the deaths of at least 5 people, knocked out power to hundreds of thousands of people, triggered flash floods, and forced the closure of some regional rail lines. It's another reminder to be sure that you and your family family are prepared for these increasing intense extreme weather events. In politics, Trump Environmental Protection Agency Administrator Scott Pruitt got a grilling from Democrats in a Wednesday Senate Appropriations Committee hearing.
Grilled Pruitt.
Democratic Senator Tom Udall of New Mexico excoriated Pruitt over the 12 separate probes and investigations into his spending and ethics scandals.
12 official federal investigations of this guy.
Yes, the Inspector General of the EPA said that he will now investigate Pruitt's use of secret private email addresses that bypass public records laws, but it may have to wait until he gets a bigger budget.
He was using secret email addresses.
Right.
A private server.
Yes.
Lock him up.
Here's Senator Tom Udall at that hearing.
Administrator Pruitt, it's hard to know where to begin this morning. Every day there seems to be a new scandal and you at dead center. I'm tempted to say your scandals are a mere sideshow distracting us from the long-lasting devastation your leadership is making on human health and the environment.
Tempted to say, he just said it.
Also in that hearing, Administrator Pruitt claimed that the controversies were mostly overblown, but he did admit
that as I look back on those decisions, I would not make the same decisions again. And I'm sure we're going to talk about some of those.
Oh, just a few.
And the administrator denied knowing that his own employees helped block a federal study showing toxic chemicals are contaminating water systems across the country.
And that study has still not been released.
Right. Meanwhile, just one of the costs of shifting the burden of pollution to the public, a new study has found that the harm of air pollution extends even into the womb. They found that children of mothers who were exposed in their third trimester to fine particles of air pollution from fossil fuels had a 60% higher risk of elevated blood pressure, and that has lifelong negative health impacts, according to lead author Dr. Noel Miller of Johns Hopkins University.
Children who have elevated blood pressure in childhood have a higher probability of having hypertension later in life and cardiovascular diseases.
Another type of pollution, plastic, has now been discovered in the deepest part of the ocean. A plastic bag was found in the Mariana Trench in the Pacific Ocean, some 7 miles beneath the surface. A new analysis documented nearly 3,500 pieces of plastic pollution and fishing gear on the deep sea floor. Some countries and cities have begun to ban single-use plastic products to address the growing scourge of plastic pollution in the ocean. But some good news, a federal appeals court has ordered a halt to construction on some portions of Dominion Energy's controversial Atlantic Coast Pipeline on the grounds that a permit granted by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is inadequate to protect 6 endangered species along its route. And finally, in Washington state, King County, home to the city of Seattle, has filed a climate liability lawsuit against 5 giant oil companies. The county is seeking damages to help pay for the costs of dealing with accelerating climate change impacts like sea level rise, extreme weather events, and ocean acidification, which is harming Washington state's shellfish industry. It's the latest in a wave of lawsuits modeled after the tobacco industry litigation, alleging that the oil companies knew burning their products caused dangerous global warming, but misled the public and investors about it.
These companies are going to pay a price. The question is, will we pay it before they do? I think we already have. For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Find us, follow us, and share us worldwide on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
The most important issues of the day. This is The Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, ricksmithshow.com. So Mike Pompeo is giving his first big speech, major policy speech, and guess where he's giving it? That's right, Heritage Foundation. No surprise there. Evidently, he claimed that strongest sanctions ever. I think taking a hit from the from Trump. Evidently, the strongest sanctions in history will be placed on Iran if Iran fails to enter into a new nuclear deal with the United States. All right, it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out, which is why I've asked our good friend Bob Ney to come talk with us. Bob, thanks for taking time for us.
Oh, thank you, Rick.
So strongest sanctions in history, Bob.
Well, you know, I've been around this issue forever. Actually, I lived in Iran in 1978 during the beginning of the revolution. And then after I went into Congress, I was involved through two presidents, both Clinton and Bush, with dealings with Iran. Vic Snyder of Arkansas, Democratic member, Ron Paul, Dennis Kucinich. There was a group of us that would, you know, entertain some issues as there were back channels. We all know how that functions, you know, to discuss issues when there were some hopes of coming together. I watched the centrifuge build up. And then the Obama administration did an arrangement with Europe and China and Russia, and then we watched the centrifuges start to go away. And the centrifuges, of course, is what the issue was, leading to a nuclear Iran. Now, the deal has been scrapped officially, as we know, and the speech begins today by Pompeo. And isn't it interesting, his first deal he tackles is the whole Iran deal. Rick, I want to refer to a New York Times editorial in 2015 by John Bolton, who's now the NSA director in the White House, who sits next to President Trump and whispers in his ear. And that op-ed in 2015, Rick, John Bolton said the way to deal with a bomb Iran is to bomb Iran. He advocates bombing Iran, including using nuclear weapons. So, you know, he's director of the NSA. I expected this speech. John Bolton is wanting to beat the war drum. John Bolton wants a war, and now he's found his little niche in the White House to do his best to create one. That's my honest assessment of this. I won't over-exaggerate by John Bolton. Just Google his name, anybody listening.
No, you're absolutely right. And the message, and we said this when Trump picked him, that the message that he was sending Iran was just that message. Whether he knew it or not, by choosing Bolton to be in that national security advisor position, he was telling Iran that's bombing you is a possibility.
Well, yes, correct. And no matter what Iran would do, now look, they're no walk in the park. We all know that. We understand it. That's why there's agreements like this that are verified and checked, and penalties imposed. But agreements like we had with the Obama administration. But right now, it wouldn't matter what Iran would do or not do. John Bolton wants to bomb Iran. Doesn't matter. I mean, John Bolton might want to bomb Canada just, you know, in case they get out of control in 60 years from now.
No, it's a scary moment in time. And to have these people in this position, scary to me as well, because, look, I don't know where Trump is on anything. And I don't think anyone does either. And this idea that, you know, maybe we need unpredictable. No, I'm not comfortable with unpredictable.
Well, you know, I must be the first to admit when he picked Tillerson for Secretary of State, in just analyzing it, he's coming from an oil background. I wasn't really happy with it, and really didn't have much confidence. Frankly, as Tillerson went on, I became a lot more, ingrained with his positions, because Tillerson's positions were much more balanced, and he was, in fact, the president got angry at him over the Iran position because Tillerson said continue the Obama deal. And then, of course, everything changed, and now you have Pompeo and Bolton. I mean, Bolton's way, 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 way out there, and Pompeo is way out there. So you don't have any buffer here, except that the Chief of Staff, Kelly, by the way, Rick, doesn't like all of this, but then again, obviously he didn't win on this issue.
No, I mean, from what reports are, you know, he's in the doghouse heading towards the exit, probably as well. Who knows? But you know, you look at this and you look at all of this chaos, and you know, as I started off the show today with you look at the report coming out of the White House that Trump doesn't really understand why North Korea is saying something publicly that they didn't say privately, why that's different. He doesn't seem all that interested in learning about the what's going on with the nuclear program in North Korea. And you look at all of this uncertainty and all of this, one day it's one way, another day it's an about face going the other way. I mean, this kind of chaos is well, is kind of bad.
Well, I think with North Korea and Iran, look, there's some trade things that I think we can look at it and say, okay, Trump's making some right moves, being aggressive. He's made some right moves on that. The Iran and North Korea deals are different. And here's the other thing. I'm going to go back to the favorite topic I like to beat, which is John Bolton. He was for preemptive strikes in North Korea. So what you have is honestly a perfect deal. Trump Nobel Peace Prize. All the things are lined up in a row on North Korea for the first time in 70-some years, and all of a sudden it starts to go haywire. Well, if you're director of this is purely speculative. I have no basis to say what I'm about to say, but having been around, been in Congress, I know how things work. And if you're director of the NSA, which John Bolton is, National Security Agency, you have ways to get words and thoughts out there through back channels. Who knows if Bolton is sending signals to other people, and then it's a signal to North Korea that, we're going to get you. I mean, who knows? When you've got a guy like that in there that has the power of the NSA.
No,
you don't know, Rick. Something has disrupted all of this. Bolton went on TV and said he was going to do the Libya plan with North Korea. What is the Libya plan? Denuke, and then we'll support people that will kill you. That's the Libya plan. That's what happened.
Yeah. No, I mean, the messaging, if you're on, the messaging is get the bomb as fast as possible. And I've been saying that for a while, because if you're North Korea, if you're Iran, in a heartbeat, you go get that, because, we don't screw with Pakistan, do we? And Bin Laden was hiding in Pakistan all that time, because they've got the bomb.
That's true.
It's crazy. Let's move on. The temper tantrum over the weekend. Did you follow the Twitter temper tantrum, or are you smart enough to turn it off?
No, I followed it because you mean on the mole, right?
Yeah.
The FBI agent. It ties in to the other story we were carrying today, which is about Giuliani and the wrap-up of the Mueller investigation by September the 1st, if Mueller can talk to Trump. Now, this is what's, coming out from Giuliani, that supposedly Mueller will wrap everything up if he can talk to the president by September the 1st and be done with everything. And the reason I say it ties in, if there was anybody that was an informant or went through FISA court, that was an informant involved with the Trump campaign or met with people from the Trump campaign, which is, it looks like what happened, then even though Mueller had nothing to do with it, Rick, if this story is out there and it's getting the coverage it's getting, then it does cloud, you see what I'm saying? It does cloud the Mueller issue. It clouds it from the White House's point of view. In other words, it's intentional, and one would beat that drum as hard as possible. They had somebody in there. It's all connected. Justice connected to Mueller. Mueller's connected to, Obama, et cetera, et cetera.
No, I mean, it's, we were talking earlier about, how, the 26 campaign and Trump, the administration, they like to use these psyop kind of warfare technology, ideals. And, this is what it seems like. I mean, you're just flooding with disinformation, and you're muddying the waters to where people just throw up their hands and go, they're all crooks. They can't believe anything, and move on when there are, very real crimes. I mean, you follow the money in all of this, and Will Bunch did a great piece that I highly suggest people take a look at how our foreign policy has completely changed, and how there just seems to be a flood of money and a flood of influence and all of this stuff around, the Kushner deals and all of this. And at some point you got to go, when do we believe what's right in front of us?
Well,
yeah, there you go.
I think that the other probably sad part to all of this is I'm not sure anybody will ever zero in also where Russia was during the elections, what other things it did. I think that's even gotten thrown by the wayside.
You're right. And finally, the about face on the China tariffs. Evidently, we're not doing the steel and aluminum tariffs now.
Yes, this one's interesting. I can't call this one yet. If, in fact, they have some kind of deal coming and they've got a overall comprehensive package, and they can announce that, it'll be great. If this is just another announcement, he's gotten tough, and then now we're negotiating and nothing happens, then the very base he took away from Hillary Clinton because they were suspicious, a lot of union people were suspicious of her, then he will have lost, I predict anyway, will have lost that base because this is a big deal. This isn't something you can kind of get out there and slap them around a little bit and then you're done. This is a big deal. So I would say if they don't produce something within about 90 days, 4 months, 5 months at the most, then this was all just what I would call dog and pony. Now, if they do, great. But if they don't, I think it was smoke and mirrors.
Yeah, I mean, from initial reports, it looks to me like China has agreed to buy more agricultural products, going to buy more food. And you go, really? Are we surprised by that? And the good thing is it'll raise the price of food for everybody else. So it could actually have a negative effect. But I didn't see anything on manufacturing or any of the other stuff. Again, devil in the details.
Yes, sir.
Just is what it is. Bob, I appreciate the time, man.
Thank
Good talking with you.
You too.
Our good friend Bob Ney, Talk Media News. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Radio of, for, and by we the working people. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1946. That was the day that Democratic President Harry S. Truman ordered the government seizure of the nation's bituminous coal mines. 800,000 United Mine Workers of America, led by John L. Lewis, had gone out on strike. A wave of strikes washed over the United States after World War II. As part of the war effort, most unions had agreed not to conduct work actions during the war. But as industry profits soared due to wartime government contracts, workers saw little improvements in their wages or working conditions. Pent-up worker frustration boiled over after the war. Historian Jeremy Breacher had noted that the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics called the first half of 1946, quote, the most concentrated period of labor management strife in the country's history. The miners were part of that strife. They wanted improved wages, better health care benefits, and safety on the job. The strike had a ripple effect felt far beyond the coal fields. In early May, the Chicago Tribune warned, quote, the nation's worst coal strike tonight slowed the wheels of American industry toward a predictable full stoppage. Coal turned the wheels of industry, and the strike had drastically slowed mining. The government seized the mines and ordered the miners back to work. But still, the coal companies refused to meet the coal miners' demands. Unsatisfied with the resolution of the strike, the miners walked out again in November. The government fined the union $3.5 million, which it later reduced. President Truman called the work actions a rebellion against the government. But the determination of the miners forced the owners to agree to most of their demands. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
From United Nations headquarters in New York, I'm Luke Vargas with your World in 2 Minutes. The UN's top human rights official, Jordanian Prince Zayed Ra'ad Al Hussein, accused the Israeli government on Friday of misrepresenting the threat posed to Israeli troops on Monday, when Israeli live fire killed at least 60 people in clashes along the Israeli-Gaza border.
Although some of the demonstrators threw Molotov cocktails, used slingshots to throw stones, flew burning kites into Israel, and attempted to use wire cutters against the two fences between Gaza and Israel, these actions alone do not appear to constitute the imminent threat to life or deadly injury which could justify the use of lethal force.
He went on to describe the residents of Gaza as being penned in behind fences and suffering from ever greater poverty as Israel's decade-long blockade of Gaza drags on.
They are, in essence, caged in a toxic slum from birth to death, deprived of dignity, dehumanized by the Israeli authorities to such a point it appears officials do not even consider that these men and women have a right, as well as every reason, to protest.
Gaza residents did receive slight relief on Friday as Egypt announced it would open its Rafah border crossing with Gaza for the month of Ramadan, which ends on June 14th. According to Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, opening the border crossing is an attempt to alleviate the burdens of the brothers in the Gaza Strip. Meanwhile, Kuwait, a current member of the UN Security Council, has proposed that an international protection mission be sent to Gaza to shield civilians, though it's unclear what form that protection force would take or how the resolution could survive a veto from the United States. Luke Vargas, the United Nations.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
Well, it appears he will not go silently into that coal mine. Evidently, Don Blankenship is claiming that he's going to run a third-party campaign for Senate in West Virginia. He says he's going to run as the Constitution Party's nominee. What's interesting, though, is West Virginia has a sore losers law that says that you can't run for the party nomination, lose, and then run for a under another party's banner. You have to actually go out and get the proper number of signatures, and you have to go that way to get on the ballot. It'll be interesting to see if he can do it. He's claiming that he's going to go to court, and there's going to be a whole fight. And to be honest, going to court in West Virginia, if you're Don Blankenship, probably not a bad deal, considering that, he probably had a hand in most of them getting on the bench, especially when you look back to some of the stories, of buying a Supreme Court seat, and, some of the shenanigans that have gone on. He said that it is especially appropriate for me to be nominated by the Constitution Party, given its staunch and uncompromising commitment to upholding the United States Constitution. I don't really even know where to go with that. I look at the former robber baron, coal baron, and convicted criminal, former prisoner is how they're throwing it out there. Someone who I argue is responsible for the killing and, was found guilty of being responsible of the killing of 29 workers that, you kind of go back and you look at all of the information that led up to his conviction, and it's glaring. And the fact that this guy would come and run for a Senate seat after getting out of jail, kind of makes me wonder what his thoughts of the state of West Virginia are. Does he think that they're all stupid? No, I'm all in favor. In fact, if there's a place where I can send $20 to help him get the signatures on a ballot, I'm actually willing to do that because it means, quite frankly, it means if he runs a successful third-party candidacy that gets 20% of the vote, that means Joe Manchin walks into re-election. And look, I'm not a huge Joe Manchin fan either, but with at least with him, there's a possibility of not getting some really horrible Supreme Court justice in the event that Kennedy does at some point retire. And also, you're able to, with enough Democrats, you take back the Senate, you're able to begin to set the agenda and hold hearings and do all the things that need to be done. If anything, this election cycle should be about, it should be about stopping the corruption. It should be about, shining the sunshine of transparency on what this administration's been doing. It should be about accountability. And it should be about getting to the bottom of all of the things that are going on. Look, do I know that Trump was guilty of all these things? I don't know it for fact, which is why we need to have these investigations. I think the Nixon statement, you got to know if your president's a crook. You got to know if this administration is being sold to the highest bidder. And at this moment, there's a large percentage of people in this country who believe that our policy is up to the highest bidder. And that this kleptocratic administration is robbing us blind, and not just us now, but the future for our children. It's just right there for me. Anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Tell me what you think. If you got any thoughts, stories you think we missed, I'd love to hear it. Rick at thericksmithshow.com. If you missed you missed any part of the show, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com. Also, you can take the show anywhere you want to go at any time on your schedule. Just get the Rick Smith Show app. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you back here tomorrow.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Together, we can make America better. Email Rick at thericksmithshow.com or interact with us anytime at thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
Its color like the tide of flood beneath the lunar sway, imperial